Welcome to the CMO Chapter podcast, where we dive deep into the dynamic world of Chief Marketing Officers. Join us as we explore the careers, insights, and strategies of top marketing executives who shape the brands we know and love. Whether you're a seasoned marketer, aspiring CMO, or simply just curious to understand what it really takes to step into the shoes of the CMO. This podcast is your backstage pass to discovering what it's like to really lead and innovate in the ever-evolving landscape of business. Stay tuned as we uncover the stories of the visionaries behind the brand. Daniel McDermott, delighted to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So, Daniel, I have obviously been connected with you, I think, for a while. And I know, certainly looking at your career, I mean, really quite a broad career. I think 25 years, is it now, in marketing?
Yeah, it's getting there. Time passes more quickly than you think.
It does. It flies by.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Daniel, do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. As you mentioned, sort of a long-time B2B marketer in the technology industry. So doing that for sort of 25 odd years now, through sort of, starting in graduate sort of roles and then sort of working your way around and ending up in the last sort of nearly 10 years of sort of working for SaaS scale companies. So really looking at that sort of ability to go from reasonably small to quite large and quite quickly. And how to actually sort of, I guess, go about doing that within sort of the Australian market as well as abroad as well.
Yeah. Excellent. So, curious to understand. So, when I look back at your profile, LinkedIn, I think it was Ericsson. Is that
Hmm.
right? Where I
Yeah.
saw you
Yep.
began your career. And I saw that you were doing a bit of BD, sort of sales, and a bit of marketing, a bit of a blend there.
Yep.
Do you think that experience there is really, because I know the more senior we get, the biggest thing is very much being able to align with sales. So, having been in those shoes, do you think that that really sort of put you in a good position?
Yeah, it was interesting. I guess like I did a business degree, came out of that not really knowing what to do, and sort of applied for there was graduate program roles at the time, and so there was a corporate graduate role at Ericsson. It was great because you sort of rotated through the business over a couple of years, so you got to do some pretty good projects, work with great people, but it wasn't like a very narrow roles, if you like. They were quite broad, and you sort of had to make the most of it yourself and sort of make it up a little bit as you go, which was great learning to work out like, well, what do I want to do? What am I good at? What's enjoyable? Where do I think a career can be?
Yeah.
And doing that, I think led me to saying, well, what I really did for the first 4 or 5 years was marketing as we know it, but without a marketing title.
Yeah.
So it was always, and I sort of thought, well, maybe I should do a job that actually has marketing in the title, and sort of bring that experience together. And that sort of was, I guess, one of those moments where it sort of crystallized in my mind, and it was like, yeah, that's the path that I want to go down. But it wasn't predetermined, coming out of school or uni or anything like that. It sort of evolved a little bit with experience and then sort of seeing, well, what do you like and what are you good at,
Yeah.
and sort of
Yeah.
making the most of it.
Yeah. I think those early years in your career is so important because it's almost, I call it almost like the career buffet, because you kind of, you're working out what you do like, what you don't like, what you might go back for, what you're never going to touch ever again. So it's really sort of understanding what that looks like. So what about the SaaS industry? So is that an industry that what drew you to really get into particularly that industry?
Yeah, I guess it was always in technology, uh, and really like the idea of SaaS came about in probably the late sort of noughties.
Mm,
And I was working at a company called CA Technologies, and we were a very traditional software on-premise software company, very large scale, big enterprise customers. And then this idea of this sort of software as a service came along and sort of infrastructure as a service, and the whole notion of cloud sort of took off.
yeah.
And it's one of those things, and I guess that's a great thing about the tech industry, right? Is that it evolves, so you have to evolve. You can't get stuck. You can't just go, well, this is how we've always done things, because tomorrow there's a new disruption, a new evolution, something that has changed everything fairly quickly, and you've got to be able to adapt to that.
Mm,
And SaaS was very much like that. It came like a freight train, and there was, a lot of people that were like, yeah, this won't last and it will never
yeah.
work and the infrastructure's not there and all the reasons why it couldn't be. Whereas I sort of just sort of thought, well, this is where it's heading. So sort of embraced that, jumped on board, and made the most of having that opportunity to learn, I guess, within a big business about what the new evolution looked like. And then to be able to take those skills and that foundation and take it into pure SaaS businesses, I think meant that I had a grounding in that, I guess, that evolution and what it took and what it takes to then take something new to market, challenge the status
Yeah.
quo and be a bit different. So it was yeah, it was a pretty cool time. It's funny at the time you sort of it's an evolution, it's a bit of a revolution, but it's an evolution at the time. You sort of it's coming, and you're going through that. But then all of a sudden it arrives fairly quickly, and if you're not ready and you're not on top of it, it can pass by very quickly. So.
Yeah. It's a really interesting point there because you're right. I think, the evolution of SaaS is just constant. It's every single day, technology is emerging, so is businesses. It's so is it what do you do to stay so current and, handle that? Like, is there any magic ingredients or formula?
I don't think so, honestly, is is the simple answer. I think, like, the thing is you've got to embrace the industry that you're in and know about it and learn about it. And I think one of the things and some of the advice I'd always have is that, like, you can't if you're in technology, you can't be afraid of the technology. And I think too often, particularly junior marketers are like, "Oh, that's I'm not technical. That's not me," And it's like, okay, but you sort of need to know the product that you're offering and its value and how it works and why customers care about it. So you have to know enough. So I think that curiosity around, well, what is this? How does it work? Why do people care? If you're asking yourself those questions, you'll find resources to learn about it.
Hmm.
There's no way to keep up with everything, right? Like, I mean, like, it is moving so quickly and there's so many categories and that. So I find that more for me, it is like when I'm in an area, know as much as you can about that. And that might mean that you have blind spots to other things and then that sort of thing. But that's okay. You can learn and evolve and move on as well. But definitely know the category that you're in and the products that you have.
Yeah,
And don't be afraid of the tech. It's not that scary most of the time. Even really technical stuff is fine. And just I always say, just make friends with a good sort of sales engineer.
absolutely.
Hang out with them, spend time, help them with crafting the narrative for their demos. They're great at the demo, but what about the pieces around it, and how do you help them? And then you'll learn a ton from actually doing that and spending that time with them and having that connection. So yeah, don't be afraid of the tech.
Yeah.
It's not that scary.
Yeah. Good to know. Good to know. I'm personally not the most technical individual out there, but I'm having to, yeah, lean into it, as they say. I have got better. I want to talk a little bit more about leadership. So, in your previous roles, can you tell me how big have some of these teams been that you've managed?
Yeah, in general, I'd say they're like sort of that sort of small mid-sized team overall, sort of 3 to 8 people in terms of marketers and that. At some stages, it's probably got to close to 20,
Yeah.
including sort of BDR teams and that sort of thing, depending on reporting lines and stuff. So most of the teams in tech, unless you're in a really big business, right,
Mhm.
they're sort of there's a few in region, right, and whether that's in Australia or across APAC. And you're going to have sort of that, 5 to 10 often is sort of that sort of sweet spot for many organizations. And then just it sort of fluctuates with the flows of the business and the time and where things are at.
Absolutely. So with that, I guess I'm curious to understand. I mean, when you first started to, develop and establish yourself as a leader, and you get your first direct report, and then you've got five, and now you've got eight, and then you might get 20. So how have you had to really work on your leadership style in terms of being a lot more comfortable managing a team, or has that been something that organically came quite naturally to you?
No, I think you definitely have to work on it. And I think what you learn very quickly is how different people are. And
Mm,
so you've sort of got your way of doing things and you're used to that. And it's obviously worked because you've sort of, maybe you've been promoted and you've got somewhere and so you sort of think, oh, you have things under control. And then it's like, and then the whole thing is sort of disrupted very quickly. And I think that's the thing is how to basically engage with lots of different types of personalities, people, opinions, and how to actually sort of take that on board and definitely not see it as threatening. I think some early leaders see that, like particularly if people are challenging or challenging ideas and wanting to do things differently. That's great. Like you've got to embrace those things. But I think that sometimes it can be seen as confrontation, I guess, rather than sort of collaboration. So I think you've got to be able to take that on board, understand where people are coming from. So and I think that's the other thing is learn to take time with
Yeah.
people. It can't just happen overnight. It's not just like you say, a natural thing that just everything clicks from day one. You have to take time with people. You have to ask questions. You've got to learn about them and their experience and where they're coming from, that the perspective that they have,
Hmm.
and then be able to help round that out and work together to make something better as a group rather than sort of a set of individuals. And yeah, and it doesn't always work, you've got sometimes it's hard and sometimes it's, everyone's busy, you're short on time. Time is the enemy of everything, right? Like, everything
Absolutely.
is due yesterday and, it needs to be the best and all of those sort of things. So how do you allow for the time to collaborate, to ideate together, to work on projects, when there is that time pressure and that? And so you've got to find that balance and allow that time for people to connect and work together. And the results probably come slightly slower than what you might think in the
Yeah.
first instance, but I think they're much better and they're more sustainable when you get that right. But you've got to be able to also sort of learn to be able to navigate, I guess, the pressures of the business, and be able to sort of articulate that time frame and what success looks like and when things are possible, rather than just accepting that it's like, well, next quarter it's going to be double what it is this quarter,
Yeah.
and we're going to go from there, and then we'll do it a double again. It's like, "Mm, okay, let's
Yeah.
let's have a
Dial
think
it back
about
a
that
bit.
and work it out." Yeah,
Absolutely. Do you think, I think you made a really valid point because, I obviously as a recruiter, I speak to many people that, they don't find the right leader or they struggle because they're just so under pressure and, they find they don't have time and that they don't have time to even warm up. It's like, bang, we want
yeah,
results now. I and I guess one thing I've tried to work with many people is trying to sort of become more aware of asking the right questions when you are interviewing as well. And that comes with obviously more experience, perhaps more war wounds, battle scars, knowing what you don't want and what you do want.
yeah.
Is there any advice that you could give marketers that, perhaps are interviewing at the moment that, what to look for, anything that if you were interviewing for a role, what do you look for when you're looking at your next leader?
Yeah, I think it is somebody who's willing to listen and be empathetic. And and if you have that, then I think that buys the time in some
Yeah,
ways, because it's like they're allowing for the conversation to evolve. Marketing is one of those things where there is no answer. There's no
yeah,
one answer to anything, right? Everything is nuanced. It's someone's opinion. It's what you think's best based on the information and the experience and everything that you have. But nobody knows what the answer is, right? And so you have to be willing to engage in that conversation, listen to different opinions, try things,
yeah,
and be open to failure, be open to feedback, be open to learning. So if you're able to have that sort of empathetic approach and the ability to listen, I think that helps in all aspects, and really helps in terms of a leader and their teams. I think
um,
getting into that groove of knowing that it's not perfect, but embracing sort of the challenge and the chaos and all the things, and that's
mhm,
okay, because you're actually in it together and you're going to have those conversations and you'll work through them together and you'll get supported along the way, both in terms of when the good things go well and the good times and the
yeah,
success that comes with that, and the tough times when things don't work, and that's okay. It's not about leaving people behind. It's about learning and evolving and going again.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I want to talk in terms of challenges. I mean, we all have bumps in the road as we're, transforming throughout our careers. Was there any sort of real learnings from your perspective that, you've perhaps, I don't know, worked on campaigns that have not gone to plan, or you've hired people and they've said they were perfect and now they're not. And is it what sort of, I guess, key learnings have you personally experienced, and maybe that's come from challenges as well that you've had?
Yeah, probably too many to mention. We might be here for a while. Yeah, probably a couple that come to mind. The first thing is, I think, is that resilience when things go wrong, and I guess being in the tech business, like I said, sort of the first sort of 4 or 5 years was fantastic. Sort of got these great opportunities, did these amazing things, everything was
Yeah.
going swimmingly, and then the reality of the tech business sort of hit, where
Yeah.
I had sort of 3 roles made redundant in 4 years, and I was working for a telco who didn't get a funding round. Bang,
Mm,
2 weeks later, you're gone. Um, you know, was working for a global business where it was a distributed global marketing team, and then they decided to bring everybody into the UK. It was like, so everybody in Australia and Germany and elsewhere were gone. So it was things like that. And what I sort of thought was, in marketing and in campaigns, you need to be creative. I think you need to be creative in the way you think about your career as
yeah.
well. So one of those challenges of that global sort of consolidation was everything was going to the UK and there was no expat roles or anything like that. And I applied for one of the roles and they're like, you can't do that. You're Australian. I'm like, yeah, but my dad's English, so I have the right to work in the UK. And they're like, oh. So, and look, lucky enough that at that time, had the flexibility and my wife and I packed up and went to the UK and stuff. And so I think it is, how do you think creatively about how to solve that problem? And just because it's said in one way, what can you do differently? How do you position yourself? How do you overcome that? Um, and how do you keep going when it's,
Yeah.
it doesn't
Yeah.
always work and it's not perfect. But it's like, how do you actually keep at it. And I think that resiliency you learn through those hard times, and it's not at the time it's not great and it's not easy, and you sort of it is definitely it's worrying on many fronts, right? And I think everyone goes through that, but I think you learn over time that if you can do that and apply that
Mm,
creativity and that problem solving mindset that you sort of have to your role, do it for your career as well,
yeah.
and be open to if you've got the opportunity to change locations and that works for you, then great. If that doesn't work, that's okay. Be creative about what works for you and how to do that. But I think that that's really important, and I think in this day and age, you've got to have that flexibility in terms of how you go about things. And if you can do that, be a bit creative. It will hold you in good stead over time. But it's not easy, and it's a challenge at the time, right? Like when you're facing that uncertainty. It's definitely tough, but it's you keep going and you realize that it's part of the journey, I guess.
Absolutely. Especially at the moment, I think there's a lot there, a lot of our listeners that would absolutely agree, very much with what you've said. You mentioned there, and I just want to tap into that because it's quite interesting. Obviously, you spent time in the UK as well. Um, I've spoken to quite a few CMOs who, over the years, as they've developed, they have also done the same, where they've moved country or they've had that international change, and they really sort of said, look, it was a real sort of pivotal moment in their career because it made them a lot more confident, more worldly, really got the big picture. Is that something that, again, I mean, you'd recommend to other marketers that are wanting to develop as leaders or even just evolve in their careers? I mean, how much would you say that time really impacted your career?
Yeah, I think definitely. Like, I think being based in the UK and it was a very strong sort of European business, I think was really important because it is that notion of all of those different cultures, and we have that a bit. We have that in APAC. If you can get an APAC type role and work across the different countries here and that, but a lot of the time, like particularly in technology, it's a lot of US businesses, English speaking, it's different, but it's a lot the same, right? And it's sort of the US, Australia, the UK. There's more similarities than differences a
Yeah.
lot of the time, right? And so seeing really, completely different markets. Going to Slovakia to run sales training,
Uh,
and turning up and seeing your slide deck translated into Slovakian and saying this is what we think it is, and then asking you interpretations and making sure that they're getting it right was just like. wow, this is cool.
Yeah.
Like, it's like like, who would have ever thought that this is gonna, how things would turn out? But you just sort of see that bigger picture and that and how different, things are and how different markets are and how you and how that gets, I guess, taken and
Mhm.
adapted and put into market in local markets gives you that sense of like you have to know what the field I think is experiencing, and the more that you see that directly, I think the better off you are, and the more that you can incorporate that into your everyday and even into the Australian market because it is different here than the US, and you've got to understand that and interpret those differences.
Absolutely. What advice would you give? I mean, I obviously speak to lots and lots and lots of different marketers, and you get some that are in FMCG, some that want to work in retail, educate. It's really broad. And there are some out there that very much want to work in SaaS. So, what advice would you give a marketer that is, hopefully one day looking at people like you and thinking, gosh, I'd love to be, one day a CMO or get to that top spot, particularly in that market? Is there any advice you would give them or any sort of, I guess, podcasts or resources or, books that you would say actually get ahead of this?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. I think there's always I always believe that everything's sort of built from strong foundations, right? So you've got to get the foundations of your marketing programs and tech marketing right, and then you add the new technologies and the better ways of doing things and the new advances on top of that, right? But so I think in terms of getting the foundations right,
Yeah.
there's still some classics that have been around for a long time now that I think hold true. One is definitely the idea of if you want to bring new technology products to market, Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm is still the best way of thinking about how to do that and launch new businesses and products and what that growth looks
Mhm,
like.
mhm.
Um, the there's more modern sort of ones around like how do you think about product led growth and how do you think about actually engaging an audience before getting revenue, heaven forbid, right, in software sales. So how do you go about doing that? So Dr. Michael Wu has a book called the Science of Social. And it sounds very B2C, or social marketing, and is that really for us? It's fascinating and it's really interesting and it really applies. And it is a very different way of thinking about how to engage the audience and
Yeah,
what success looks like and how monetizing that is very different than a traditional sales model. So learning that I think is very important in this day and age of product led growth and product sort of go to market motions. And I guess the last one is a bit of an Australian classic. I think any Australian B2B marketer should read The Leaky Funnel by Hugh McFarlane. It is still it's the foundation in many ways of like how to think about campaign planning and actually do that really well, and to be able to have that notion and that idea of positioning to audiences so clearly. So there's sort of three foundational things that I think you have to sort of do. But I think it is also just, I think you mentioned as well, like being able to work with
yeah,
salespeople. How do you build relationships with sales and understanding their world and that? So I always sort of encourage people to think about like, how do you do the things that are outside of your job description that you need to do? And one of them is building those sales
yeah.
relationships. So I always advocate like, become the voice of marketing to a sales team.
Mm,
So whether that's the inside sales team or a segment or a regional sales team, but become the voice of marketing to them. And that means one, as a junior marketer, you have to learn everything that's happening in marketing. So all of a sudden, you have to have that
well,
that purview across all aspects of your team and what's happening and what's going on, because you have to articulate that to the sales team. You also have to be open to that feedback, and you've got to be able to listen. Doesn't and you've got to be able to learn to negotiate and not
yeah,
not say yes to everything, and learn to how to say no, but still keep people happy in that process. So I think that learning those things they take time, they're subtle, they are then there's not one way of doing
yeah,
it, but you've got to sort of break out of your own comfort zone and learn those sort of soft skills and that ability to integrate into the business, and then have those business conversations I think are critical. And without that, you can be a great marketer, but you'll be a great marketer in a in a particular area,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
This gives you that ability to get broader, and to sort of have more of a business impact in the work that you do and the conversations that you have.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with a lecturer recently, and he made such a valid point. I think he'd started his career, he'd worked in sales, and he said, actually, now he's teaching marketing. And he said it was the best thing I ever did because, I was in the shoes, I got where they were coming from. So, yeah, maybe, having that ability like yourself, being in that BD sort of space initially right back in your career is
Mm.
obviously going to help as well. I want to sort of talk a little bit more about, I guess, emerging trends or technology that you're seeing, perhaps particularly a little bit more in the SaaS space that you're getting excited about now. I mean, is there anything out there? Of course, we all talk about AI. We've done that, but is there anything that particularly you see in terms of the future of how marketing is going to be impacted within SaaS? Anything there that particularly resonates?
Yeah, I think that I think we've seen a real explosion in martech and revtech sort of technologies in probably the last sort of 5 or 6 years, and so I think it is one understanding that industry in its totality, what's possible, what's out there, knowing that not all of it's going to last. There is a bit of things that are tried and they're not working, and that. So, what are the ones that are going to be sort of sustainable?
Hmm.
And actually sort of drive towards the future. And I think that that ability to understand sort of signals, and we've all been across intent data for a long time, but like, to be completely honest, a lot of it was a bit useless for a
Yeah.
while, right? It's like, well, cool, and you get all excited, and then it's like, well, now what? Now what
Yeah.
can we do with it?
Yeah.
So that ability to be able to listen to what's happening across the world, across the web, be able to synthesize and interpret that, and where Gen AI, I think, then comes in is that the holy grail of what we've always spoken about, which is
Yeah.
getting the right content to the right person at the right time by the right channel. We've spoken about it forever, but it's actually been near on impossible to deliver on, right? Like, you'll get it right occasionally, but you can't do that at scale all the time. What the technology is allowing us to do is to do that. So how do you set up your systems, your processes, your content, and the way that you do things to deliver on that ultimate promise that we've all spoken about forever,
Yeah.
but have always then struggled to actually deliver upon? So I think that the opportunities now to embrace that and actually, deliver what we've always said we were going to,
Yeah.
as professional marketers, and really make that come to life. So I think that's the exciting thing. So it is being able to interpret all the information and the intent and the signals that are out there, and then deliver upon that in a really meaningful way quickly and at scale is yeah, it's really exciting.
I think it's very exciting. I think we're just at the beginning, aren't we, really, in terms of what's, when we look at personalization being so much more targeted. Yeah, I think again, it's not being scared of that and being able to
Correct.
sort of, focus on it. I've spoken to so many CMOs and GMs, etc., around this. And I think as long as you're open to it, you've not got your head in the sand, it's gonna be, yeah, I think that's the key, really
Yeah.
focus and develop your career more in that space.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people know what the answer is.
No,
So,
they
like,
don't. Yeah.
sort of carve out an area where you can experiment, where you can actually look to really trial something, learn from that, and really interpret, like, well, what is it doing? What's working? What
Mhm.
can be better? How else can I apply that? But I think that ability to experiment now is a great time, right? Like, there's so many things out there, but there isn't a definitive way of doing it.
Mm.
So, be brave, take on some new tech, some new ways of doing things, and trial it, right? Like, don't go crazy and bet the business on it maybe day one, but trial something in an area and learn, and then move quickly to
Yeah,
scale that out.
excellent. I wanted to understand, and this is really more so I'm curious to get your opinion. When we look at, I've had again lots of conversations around this, but when we look at the typical role as CMO, people say, well, look, it can be a pretty lonely gig sometimes when you're up there. And there's also now, I mean, we're getting all these, fancy new titles coming where it's like, growth, it's yeah, CXO and chief customer officer. And What are your thoughts on that? I'm curious to get a bit of an understanding. Like, do you see, because I personally think, the roles is always going to be there. There's always going to be a need, but, it's just evolving. But I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's very much around the business and the business that business is in, if you know what
Yeah.
I mean. So it's
Yeah.
like, like some of the growth roles are just a new way of saying sales. So it's a sales role, and unless you wanna do that, it's not for a marketer,
Yeah.
right? And so, and then there's growth roles that are truly like that notion of product-led growth and being marketing-led rather than sales-led in terms of the growth motion. So I think you need to understand the business and what they're delivering, in terms of then being able to truly interpret what the role means, because growth is one example, customer experience is another
Yeah.
one, uh, customer officer is another one. They all actually mean different things in different businesses. So sometimes as a marketer, I think, you know, you can align to some of those, but not all.
Mm,
And so I think you've got to make sure that you're realistic and understand like where you position your value. I think the role of marketing and a CMO is always needed in a business, but it may not have the title. It may not have that role, that description to it. But it's how do you take your experience and your skills and apply that in the right way to achieve, the way that they might be calling the role or
yeah.
interpreting it and that. But it is a lot of it's the same, but you've got to be really clear on what those things actually mean. Otherwise, you set yourself up for failure as
Yeah.
well. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I'm the head of growth, and then you've got a 50-person sales team that you've never run. Like, good luck, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's not great for you, not great for the business, and just going to be stressful. So, whereas you're head of growth and it's launching a new product and taking that to market, and and driving that through an actual sort of digital
Mm,
touch point and marketing motion. Awesome.
yeah. Yeah.
That's what we want to do. So I think, yeah, you've got to be clear on the expectations.
Absolutely. In your humble opinion, what are the top traits that you would say make a successful CMO?
So I think I mentioned before, I think that idea of being a good listener and being empathetic, I think is really important as a marketer, because you've got to be able to listen to opinions and hear that, and you've got to be able to articulate back your thoughts into that. So I think that ability to be a really good listener, and I think that starts with being able to ask the right sort of questions and get really explore for information and understand different perspectives is critical. I think, yeah, again, one of those things where you can't be afraid of things, you can't be afraid of the numbers. You
Yeah.
can't go, "Oh, I was no good at maths," or "I don't
Yeah.
like that, that's not my thing." Numbers are the language of business.
Yeah.
And so you have to learn the metrics that matter in your organization, how they come about, and how the role of marketing in contributing to those, understanding what performance looks like, what good is. Um, if you can't have a metrics conversation, you there's going to be a ceiling on how far you can
Yeah.
go, because that is the language that business talks about, that management and executive and strategy looks at. So you have to be able to interpret that and include that as part of your narrative. So I think that like that ability to embrace the numbers, embrace sort of different perspectives and listening to people, and ultimately just a bit of old fashioned know your customer.
Yeah.
Learn, put yourself in their shoes as much as you can. Find ways to talk to end users and customers and prospects, and hear their stories, as much as you can. And in marketing, I find too often people hiding behind their desk and in a certain role and say, "Oh, that's not my role." So,
Yeah.
but we've got a great opportunity to do that. Go and interview somebody to create a case study. It may not be in your job description, but you want to do it, or find a research project and go and listen to the market. Turn up, you're a digital marketer, but turn up at an event and have a conversation
Yeah.
on a booth with people. Like, we actually have great vehicles and mechanisms to go and engage with the end user community and with customers. And I find too often people don't take those opportunities. And I think you've got to be able to do that, because if you hear it from them, you can then interpret that internally. You can then drive that in terms of metrics and numbers and where it needs to go, and really build that as a really cohesive strategy. So yeah, I definitely say you've got to take those opportunities all the time when they come
Yeah.
up.
And with your career, I mean, your last role was CMO at Mimecast. So I think, was it 6 years? I think you were there approximately,
Yep.
or coming up to six.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and again, lots of conversations around this, but I'm definitely learning, the path to CMO is not linear. We know that. How did you get, like, were you always that person that, really you sort of were picked out and, you were doing well and you were recognized for the work you were doing? Or did you feel that throughout your career as you've developed and you've got more senior, you had to really sort of put yourself forward for those opportunities?
Yeah, well, I mean, only CMO for APAC, so not not the whole business. But I think it's both. I think you do good work, and if you integrate into the business and you have those sales relationships, you sort of
Mhm.
do stand out, and you do have that opportunity to be recognised, and that. But then you've got to seek how to continue to go forward, and how do you continue to evolve
Yeah,
in that. It isn't just nothing's given to you on a silver platter, and so you've got to find your way of being able to continue to navigate through those challenges, those difficult times of sort of economic headwinds or technology sort of not working or being in the
yeah,
and difficult people. There's all of those things. So there's always going to be something and a challenge along the way. And like I say, it's not going to just be handed to you. So you've got to keep working at it, working at the craft, and working at sort of those relationships to continue to be relevant. And in as you go forward as well.
yeah. And I guess finally, I wanted to understand, and I guess I'm curious. So you've had a bit of a break. You've left Mimecast now. And
Yep.
what's next for you? Where have you got any professional goals or personal goals that you're really working towards? Or
Yeah, actually I've been enjoying a bit of a break, which has been nice. Playing a bit of golf, quite badly, but that's okay. We just had a family European vacation, which was pretty awesome.
amazing.
So that was terrific. So yeah, I think really what's next is really finding that team and that role that really gels for you. I think that's the thing. Like over time, and as you look back, like embracing the good times when you have good people in a good business that's supportive, that you're doing great things. They're the years that you look back on and go, geez, they were great. They were such good fun. You met great people, and you just did really good work that you were proud of, and that made a difference. So it is. How do you find that? That's I think the trick, and knowing that. And if it doesn't feel right, and it probably isn't, I think as well.
Yeah,
And you can sort of say that as you get to this age and sort of and know that a little bit more. But it definitely is the case, because if you don't have that and you don't get that environment, and those people around you, not just in your team but across the business, then it's all you're always sort of pushing it uphill, right?
yeah, yeah.
Whereas I think if you get that and get people embracing what the role can be and what your experience is, then you can do amazing things and have a great time doing it.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot to be said there about gut feeling. I think, yeah, I've given a lot of advice to many people recently around that. If it's too good to be true, and also just go with your gut. I think that's a
Yeah.
really big one. Well, look, I have really enjoyed chatting to you. Thank you so much for your time. It's been, yeah, really insightful. I think there's a lot there that I think a lot of people are going to be able to be inspired by and certainly learn from. So thank you.
No, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Remember, the road to CMO isn't always linear. It's filled with challenges, decisions, and moments of transformation. Whether you're charting your course or navigating a career shift, the experiences, wisdom shared today, as with our guests, is invaluable. Thank you for joining us. Keep dreaming big, keep pushing boundaries, and remember that your journey towards becoming a CMO is as much about the destination as it is about the growth you experience along the way. Until next time, continue to innovate, evolve, and carve out your path to CMO.